Coming up on Network Africa, the Food and Agriculture Organization sounds the alarm as almost 18 million people face acute food insecurity in Sudan. Doctors in Kenya's public hospitals suspend emergency services, escalating the national strike as it enters a second week. Plus, Amnesty International warns against repeal of FGM ban, decrying the inevitable setback for women's rights. Thank you for joining us on the program at this time. I'm Layo Olarinde. The UN Humanitarian Office is warning that nearly year-long conflict between Sudan's military and paramilitary forces has put the African nation on course to become the world's worst hunger crisis, with malnutrition soaring. Edem Wosonu, the Director of Humanitarian Operations, was speaking to the UN Security Council. She says that already 1/3 of Sudan's population face acute food insecurity, and catastrophic hunger levels could be reached in some areas of the Western Darfur region by the time the lean season arrives in May. According to the Deputy Director General, Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, a peaceful and negotiated political solution and immediate cessation of hostilities is an essential step in eliminating the risk of famine in Sudan. In the meantime, the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, says the outlook for food production in 2024 is bleak, as critical agricultural inputs are difficult to access in Sudan. Rain Paulson, the FAO Director of Emergencies and Resilience, is calling for humanitarian access to be urgently restored so farmers can be able to produce food. He adds that 18 million people are expected to face food crisis levels or worse in terms of acute food insecurity. Now, that is the worst level of hunger ever recorded during the harvest season in Sudan.
During the recent harvest season, which is typically, obviously, a time then when food is most plentiful, 18 million people were expected to face food crisis levels or worse in terms of acute food insecurity. That is the worst level of hunger ever recorded by the IPC during the harvest season in the Sudan. Food reserves are running low. Steep prices make it difficult to buy food. And both access and funding constraints mean humanitarian assistance cannot reach all those in need. The outlook for food production in 2024 is bleak. Critical agricultural inputs are difficult to access as we near the 2024 main planting season, which will begin in June, with land preparation activities needing to start already in April. Simultaneously, conflict is devastating livestock production, a critical source of both nutrition and income.
Well, let's now hear from the Director of the UN Humanitarian Operations and also the Deputy Director General at the FAO, speaking on how Sudan may become the world's worst hunger crisis.
A humanitarian travesty is playing out in Sudan under a veil of international inaction and inattention. Simply put, we are failing the people of Sudan. By all measures, the sheer scale of humanitarian needs, the numbers of people displaced and facing hunger, Sudan is one of the worst humanitarian disasters in recent memory. more than 1/3 of the country's estimated population are facing food insecurity. By the time the lean season arrives in May, people in some parts of Darfur could face what we term IPC Phase 5 level acute food insecurity. We call this stage a catastrophe.
A peaceful and political solution and immediate cessation of hostility to facilitate the delivery of urgent humanitarian assistance is an essential step in eliminating the risk of famine. I join my colleagues in calling all the parties to respect their obligation under international humanitarian and human rights law. Safe and sustained humanitarian access must urgently to be restored to all in need of life-saving assistance.
There is a real and growing risk that the violence in Sudan will soon create the world's largest hunger crisis. But our emergency relief operation is being severely hampered by a lack of access and a lack of resources. Currently, 90% of the people in IPC Phase 4 who urgently need life-saving food assistance are trapped in areas that are largely inaccessible to humanitarian agencies. These include conflict hotspots such as Khartoum, Gezira State, the Kordofans, and the Darfur states. Our efforts to reach these civilians are challenged by the relentless violence and by interference from the warring parties. And bureaucratic obstacles are further shrinking the space for humanitarians to operate.
In East Africa, Kenyan doctors have stopped providing emergency services at public hospitals, even as they escalate a national strike that has entered its second week. Thousands of doctors have stayed away from hospitals since last week, Thursday, over poor pay and working conditions. And this is despite a court order calling for talks between the doctors and the health ministry. Officials from the Kenya Medical Practitioners, Pharmacists and Dentists Union say the doctors escalated the strike and stopped providing bare minimum services because the government had shown no efforts to resolve the labor disputes. The striking doctors accused the government of failing to implement a raft of promises, including a collective bargaining agreement signed in 2017 after a 100-day strike that saw people die from lack of care. Now, the Kenyan government says it will release some of the bodies belonging to victims of the Shakahola starvation cult next week. At least 34 bodies have been identified and linked to their families out of the hundreds that were exhumed last year. The bodies of 429 people, including children, were dug up from graves in Shakahola. That's a remote forest just outside the coastal town of Malindi. Many of them showed signs of starvation and assault. Survivors and victims' families said self-proclaimed pastor Paul Mackenzie encouraged members of his Good News International Church to move there and to prepare for the end of the world. The chief government pathologist, Dr. Johansen Odua, says new exhumations are scheduled to be done in 2 weeks, even as 35 more grave sites have been identified. The planned fresh exhumations could drive up the death toll further. Well, we're still celebrating women in this month of March and discussing pertinent issues surrounding the female gender. We'll be talking about the female genital mutilation today, especially in light of the Gambia seeking to overturn the ban on this practice. Earlier this week, politicians in the West African nation's parliament voted to advance a controversial bill which will repeal a landmark 2015 ban on FGM that made the practice punishable by up to 3 years in prison. Well, human rights groups like Amnesty International say the bill would set a dangerous precedent for women's rights and tarnish Gambia's human rights record. Here in Nigeria, the UN Population Fund and UNICEF continue to reaffirm commitments to eliminate this harmful practice and call for collective action to stand against FGM. According to the UN agencies, Nigeria has the third highest burden of FGM globally and accounts for 10% of the 200 million women and girls survivors of FGM globally. And that's estimated at nearly 20 million. And this is coming after Ethiopia and Egypt. Well, joining us now is Costly Aderibigbe Saba. She's the Executive Secretary of the Global Youth Consortium Against Female Genital Mutilation. Costly herself is also a victim of FGM and now an advocate to end it. Welcome to the program and thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Well, as a victim and advocate against FGM, what were your thoughts when you heard that Gambia, is seeking to overturn the ban on the mutilation in the country?
Well, what is happening in the Gambia is a very sad situation, whereby we are seeing regress in the progress that have been made in the fight against female genital mutilation. Gambia initially banned FGM in 2015, and now in 2024, it started in 2023 actually, lawmakers are coming together to say that they want to repeal the law, they want to lift the ban against FGM. It's very sad, is unwarranted, is a shameful act in the 21st century, and is actually a shame on the whole of legislators in Gambia and also the pro-FGM activists in the Gambia. Well, we heard that this was because some religious leaders, clerics gathered together to say that FGM is found in their religion, it's enshrined in their religion, and it has to be protected. But the truth is that we all know that there is no religion that supports FGM. There is nowhere in the Bible where they said FGM should be practiced, and also in the Quran there is no justification for FGM in the Quran, because even Saudi Arabia, where everybody all Muslims look up to for guidance in terms of religion, have zero prevalence of female genital mutilation. Is written in the smaller ayah, and whatever is in the smaller ayah, if it harms anybody, we harms women and girls, it can be left aside. It may not be something to look at. And so picking up that part to say that FGM is justified is actually a violation of the right of women and girls, and it's something that should not be heard of in 2024.
Well, globally, we see African countries as having the highest burden of FGM. Ethiopia, Egypt, and Nigeria, the first three countries on that list. Now, help us understand further the effects of this on women and girls and the impact this could have on their health and future.
So let me quickly say that what is happening in Sierra Leone right now, it's a threat.
The Gambia, you mean?
Human rights in Gambia, is a threat to human rights of women and girls. I was speaking with some colleagues in Sierra Leone and other colleagues in the Gambia yesterday, and people told us that now in the Sierra Leone, when they go out to advocate, people are asking them, why are you still talking about FGM? Look at the Gambia just down there, another West African country. They're already repealing this. So it's not just a problem of the Gambia, it's a problem of other countries, not just in West Africa, but even across Africa. And it's a threat to the right of women and girls across the globe. If this goes on for a long time, who knows what other law, because it's never going to be successful. So I don't want to say that it is successful, but if it continues like this, other laws that protect women and girls are already at risk. They are being threatened, like laws that protect women and girls from child marriage, especially in that country, in the Gambia. They may also come after those laws. Now, that being said, the effect of FGM is very, very enormous. I'm also a survivor of female genital mutilation. And so when people try to come up with the narrative to say that FGM, does not affect women and girls and all of that, you look at those people that are telling the narrative. They are mostly men that have no experience of female genital mutilation, that have not been through the procedure, that don't know what it is, but are coming to talk about it. FGM is just a manifestation of the underlying gender inequality that exists in our society. So FGM it has very, very enormous harm. When you look at the way the procedure is being done, a girl can bleed to death. We've seen girls that have bled to death because of FGM. I've heard stories of circumcisers that stopped cutting girls because girls actually bled to death on the cutting table. You talk about infection, you talk about the obstetrics complication. I'm a medical doctor as well. I've seen women that had type 3 female genital mutilation done, and it was extremely difficult for them to give birth through vaginal delivery. Unfortunately, most of these women have also tried giving birth by themselves before they refer them to a higher level of healthcare where they were being attended to. And most times it's usually late. When we hear that a baby has gone through distress, a pregnant woman loses her baby or even loses her life. At times we don't know the underlying cause of all of this. We say it is because God, that is the way God wants it. A lot of things are happening and a lot of things are being kept in the secret and not being disclosed. It doesn't mean that FGM is the only cause of maternal mortality, but FGM contributes significantly to maternal mortality in Africa. And so this practice has to be stopped. When you look at the way the procedure is being done, like I said, so in some communities, the same instrument that is being used for one girl is the same instrument that is being used for another girl, and it continues like that. In fact, in some communities, they do it as a celebration where they bring girls together and cut them at the same time, and these instruments are not sterilized. They kept passing infection from one person to another person. These are scientifically backed up. A lot of research have been done, and some infections, some adulthood infections, sexually transmitted infections, have been traced to female genital mutilation, like hepatitis, even HIV. When HIV was still a global pandemic, when it was still very much prevalent in Africa, FGM also is one of the ways by which the virus is being transmitted from one person to another person. When you look at the psychological consequence on the survival,
I can hear the passion in your voice. It's a sad practice that's still happening, like you said, in our time, in these times. But very quickly, very quickly, what ways, could FGM be ended, especially to meet the global target of elimination by 2030?
The truth is that if we all agree that we want to end FGM, we will end FGM once and for all. So when people say, is it achievable by 2030? I say, yes, it is, but it needs the determination of everybody. Communities have to own the campaign to end FGM. It has to start from the grassroots. It's not an upward down approach. It has to start from the grassroots. Imagine that there are people outside the legislative National Assembly in the Gambia right now that are advocating for FGM, for the ban against FGM to be lifted. So it is even not about the lawmakers alone. They play a very major part. But I'm also saying that the fight against FGM has to be owned by community. Also, we need political will, very strong political will. Look at the Kenyan government, came out recently, just 2 weeks ago, to speak out publicly against female genital mutilation. This is the kind of drive we need. We need massive awareness. Awareness has to get to the root and planning.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Costly Aderigbe Saba, the Executive Secretary of the Global Youth Consortium Against Female Genital Mutilation. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for staying with us. India will prosecute 35 Somali pirates that were arrested during an operation to free a hijacked vessel off Somalia on Saturday. A Navy official say the men are due to arrive in India this weekend, where they will be handed over to law enforcement. Last week, the Indian Navy managed to seize the Malta-flagged commercial ship MV Ruin, which had been commandeered by pirates in the northern Arabian Sea in December. Now, the event was the first hijacking of a commercial ship by Somali pirates since 2017. At the peak of the activity in 2011, Somali pirate activity cost the global economy an estimated $7 billion. Over on to Zimbabwe. State prosecutors have opposed bail for the president of Zimbabwe Miners Federation, ZMF, after she appeared in court on fraud charges. Earlier, she had been arrested after allegedly attempting to sell 3 mines she doesn't own. Now, police officials say Henrietta Rushwire had been taken into police custody after a complaint had been received about mining transactions. Last year, Ms. Rushwire was convicted of trying to smuggle gold worth over $330,000 out of Zimbabwe in 2020. President Emmerson Mnangagwa of Zimbabwe has received 250,000 tons of wheat donated by the Russian government and 23,000 tons of fertilizers provided by the Olrechem and Orakali group of Russian companies. Russia's ambassador to Zimbabwe, Nikolai Karasnigov, says the grain transfer is a humanitarian assistance carried out in line with the implementation of the initiative of President Vladimir Putin. Now, this was done at a ceremony to mark the handover of the delivery in Harare. Last year, Russia announced the free grain transfer program to African countries. Aside from Zimbabwe, the program also covers Burkina Faso, Mali, Eritrea, Somalia, and the Central African Republic.
Today, the Eurochem group of companies is donating 23,000 tons of fertilizer to the people of Zimbabwe.
And let us not forget that food security cannot be achieved without fertilizers, as they ensure growth, resilience, and productivity of agricultural crops. The humanitarian shipment of 23,000 of fertilizers, comprising of potash and complex fertilizers, was made in implementation of the initiative by President Putin announced back in 2022. It was organized by the joint efforts of Uralchem, the major producer of fertilizers in Russia, and of the United Nations World Food Programme.
We welcome Russia's continued support in our ongoing efforts to consolidate and strengthen our agriculture sector towards building greater resilience.
There will be more opportunity for Nigerian students and members of the creative industry to study and train in the United States, all thanks to the launch of the Window on America at the University of Lagos and programs to hone their craft. These and many more, the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs, Ms. Lee Satterfield, made known during her foreign policy speech in Lagos. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent, Amarachi Ubani, reports.
To gain passion.
Higher education remains a sure way to gain knowledge that will impact society for good. Hence, the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Educational and Cultural Affairs picked the University of Lagos to make her foreign policy speech in Nigeria. Ahead of her speech, Vice-Chancellor of the university, Professor Folashade Ogushola, welcomed Ms. Lee Satterfield to Nigeria, and especially to the university for being one of the lead hosts of the highest number of Fulbright scholars and educational exchange program in Nigeria.
At the present count, we have over 38 Fulbright scholars in this university. And I understand, because I didn't know, that we are one of the top universities for hosting Fulbright scholars that come in from the United States. So we're very happy. But we've had other relationships with the United States. We've had quite a number of research grants written together. We've had scholars come here. We have scholars who have gone. We have students who have traveled to the U.S. And we have a huge number of alumni in the United States.
Ms. Satterfield then takes the stage to inform Nigerians of the U.S. government foreign policy on education.
Hello.
She mentions the launch of the Open Window on America and other fellowship programs to enhance relations between the two countries.
Today I want to announce the launch of the Africa Creative TV Initiative. It's a new professional development program that will focus on TV writers, producers, and this below-the-line professionals to create this industry and grow even stronger the collaboration between our two countries. I'm also happy to unlock an educational initiative, unlock the creative economy both here in Nigeria and in the United States, elevating the importance of education through our community college initiative. And typically that is a program that we offer for students to come and study in the United States in more traditional fields. This year we're opening a program for the creative economy through script to screen process. We're going to select 4 Nigerian filmmaking students to come for a year in a community college in the United States.
My question is...
A brief fireside chat opened the door for questions and answers from university students.
High school study exchange or programs for...
Nigeria is said to be the #1 provider of international students in the United States and #7 in the world. The U.S. seeks to reciprocate the favor
by providing more opportunity for students and professionals to rub minds with colleagues from around the world. Amarachi Ubani, Channels Television News.
And that's it on the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Layo Olarinde.